Welcome back to a new episode of Podcast on the Brink. It's Thursday, December 5th. Indiana, obviously, with a rough trip to the Bahamas last week. Hoosiers go 1-2, but they returned to Assembly Hall earlier this week and beat Sam Houston State. Coming up on Friday, the Hoosiers will host Miami of Ohio before Big Ten play next week. This week's guest on Podcast on the Brink for the first time this season, Ryan Corazza of Inside the Hall. Before we get to Ryan on this episode, wanted to take a minute to let you know that Podcast on the Brink is brought to you by our friends at Visit Bloomington, also a proud partner of Indiana University Athletics. Right now, Visit Bloomington is giving you and one friend the chance to score free Hoosier basketball tickets. Go to visitbloomington.com/contests. That's a contest with a S on the end. And enter the IU men's basketball giveaway. The winners will also receive a free gift card to Buccetto's Pizza and Pasta. The website, once again, visitbloomington.com/contest. That's contest with an S on the end. Terms and conditions apply. See site for details. And Ryan, good to talk to you this week on Podcast on the Brink. Before we dive in, I know you're an IU Bloomington graduate. I know you like to get back to Bloomington from time to time. What are some of your go-to spots in Bloomington?
You know, it's criminal the amount of time it's been since I've been in Bloomington. I think I'm probably rolling on maybe 7 years now that I haven't been there, which I'm ashamed to admit that, honestly. But you know, the first thing that pops to mind, especially at this age, just hitting up Nick's. Classic, iconic spot. It's just a great place to be, and I think at this age, that's where I'd want to be hitting up. You probably more in the afternoon, early evening these days, but yeah, I'm hoping maybe this next year here, a couple of my buddies I graduated with, we might be looking to get back there this year. I know that they've updated the golf course there as well, which one of my friends has played in, has really enjoyed. So I'm hoping that maybe this year is the year to hit Nick's and get some golf in.
Yeah, I've heard really good. I'm not a golfer, but I've heard really good things about the golf course. It seems like they spent a ton of money, obviously, and time to redo that. And it seems like from everything I've read and people talking to some people that have had a chance to play, it sounds like a beautiful course, and they did an excellent job. So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts if you do get a chance to get back there and play that. But the task at hand today, obviously, Indiana basketball. It's kind of we've talked a lot in the last couple of days. We talk a lot. Anyway, just with the website stuff, but it seems like we're kind of back in this spot with IU basketball where there's a lot of discontent, I guess is the best way to put it, with the fan base, just in terms of the direction of the season already, with the performance in the Bahamas. Just big picture, we haven't had an episode of Podcast on the Brink since the Bahamas, but I don't want to dwell too much, obviously, on those games, but you wrote a lot about those games. You watched those games, as did I. What were kind of some of your big picture thoughts after watching kind of how Indiana came out against Louisville and Gonzaga, and then obviously getting the win against Providence to salvage, I guess, the end of that trip?
Well, I think if you couple the Bahamas experience, which was not great, as we all know, with the Sam Houston State game on Tuesday, it's almost like the life cycle of Woody Ball. What I mean by that is go up on the national stage, right? And we've seen this in previous seasons where and we'll see where Louisville ends up. I know that they had troubles with Ole Miss at home this week, and but they played great against Indiana and really brought great energy. But suffice to say, between Louisville and Gonzaga, get up there in that non-conference marquee game, so to speak, and Indiana just didn't play well. Didn't seem like they were playing the same style of basketball, modern basketball, as these other teams, right? And everyone's complaining, oh, Indiana is, here we are again, where they're putting a premium on the post. They don't have good spacing. They're just getting the ball inside. And all these other teams are kind of on the other side, running 5 out, running a lot of motion, getting threes, cutting, moving, screening a ton. And then you move to the Providence game, and it's the all the defensive issues that Indiana fans have been griping about for years. Because of how Providence played, Indiana was heavy on that nail slot rim, high ball screen defense, which left a lot of open threes. Indiana, I did a film session mostly around that defense and how confused, out of place, out of sorts they were as they were doing it. But then what always seems to happen after there's a couple game run of why is Indiana running this on offense? Why is Indiana running this on defense? There are adjustments that are made. And I think we saw that in the Sam Houston State game where Woodson was more quick to go away from Ballo and run more of a 5-out with Goody at the 4 and some more bench guys in the lineup. And there was more fluidity to that. There was more pace. There was more transition play that was more open, I think, as a result, because they were rebounding better as well. And I would argue because of the way that Sam Houston State was getting their 3-point looks, they didn't really have to use that nail slot rim. There wasn't, Sam Houston State was not lining a guy up on the wing where Indiana usually brings that help defense over from the wing. Their threes were more coming from guys popping out to the perimeter. So we didn't see the nail slot rim stuff at all there. The thing is, though, it always seems to revert back. And this is what I mean by this life cycle where everyone complains they don't make adjustments. Then they do make some. And then everyone says, well, look, Woodson makes adjustments. But there always seems to be this bend back to nail slot rim because Mike Woodson has said that this is what we do. I'm not going to change it. And there's always that bend back to, I got that advantage inside. Let's keep feeding the post. And I think that's the tension often with, there's an evolution sometimes with how they run stuff, but there's not a revolution where they completely kick out what has observers have noted has kind of like made this program not as good as it could be and not maximizing its talent. So we'll see as things head along here, that evolution versus revolution as the season progresses.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, because you spend as much time watching film of IU as anybody. I mean, you watch the games and then you go back and look for things for film session and do a great job of putting those breakdowns. But I kind of feel like we're in the territory now where nail slot rim has kind of become this bad word, like we were with Archie Miller with the pack line defense. And I'm curious for your thoughts just on the nail slot rim. Like for those who maybe haven't followed it as closely and aren't as, I guess in tune with the terminology, as best you can tell, and I know you're not a coach, but what is the purpose of that defense specifically, that alignment, and what is it kind of designed to take away, and why maybe is it not the fit that it was? And again, this is kind of based off what Tony Adrangia said on Twitter the other day. I noticed he had a tweet that this is kind of a defense that came about. Mike Woodson was working with Larry Brown. I know they won the NBA championship together. I think it was 2004 with the Pistons. And Tony mentioned that was during a time where NBA teams were shooting, I think, something like 16 threes a game, and now it's in the high 30s. And so the thing is, everyone kind of scratched their heads with the pack line and said, well, it gives up all these 3-pointers, and well, this defense is going to be different. And maybe, the first year Mike Woodson's defense was really good in Bloomington, but it's kind of regressed backwards. I'm just curious, like from your perspective on this nail slot rim, is it something that can actually work with any consistency, or is it just kind of a system from a different era that is, and that's kind of why it's being exposed with maybe a more modern style of basketball?
All right, a couple of things to unpack here with this. I think the first is, and it's been a while since I've queried Google nail slot rim, but if you try to look this thing up, it's like a black box on the internet. There's like, all that I can remember really coming up is it's like on SB Nation or maybe an SB Nation like affiliate blog where there's a little bit spoken to it. And then there's also that classic like YouTube B-ball breakdown video where when Woodson was the head coach of the Knicks, I don't know if it's I'm not sure who the fellow is, if he was like a Knicks blogger or a Knicks beat writer or whatever, or just an observer of the NBA at large, but he sort of shows what the Knicks are doing and is kind of aghast that they're even trying to do this defense right. And that was when he was coaching the team. So in terms of what so I guess that just speaks to, it's not something that many teams are running. I don't know every defense of every 360 odd Division I NCAA basketball teams, but I would wager to bet that a very small percentage, maybe only Indiana, is doing this. Okay, so let's just start there. Second, in terms of what it's trying to do, it is trying to stop dribble penetration. Full stop, flat out. And I think against Providence, you really saw the sort of extreme measures of Indiana's like, let's get the ball out of the ball handler's hand. And this is out of a high ball, like middle third high ball screen, right? Kind of at the top of the key ball screens. And if there's another player on the wing and in the corner often, right? There's kind of on the developing strong side, there's two guys over there, right? So Indiana will bring the defender that's on the wing over to completely cut off the drive. What happens, though, is that help is just one pass away. So it's very easy for the initial ball handler on the high ball screen to just make a pass to his right, or again, could be to his left, depends, but to his right. And there's a pretty good shot there almost right off the rip from doing that. Now, often in years previous, I would say that the idea is you just get over and help a little bit to stop the drive, maybe stunt in a little bit more than you're really fully getting there, and then pop back out, right? And that's one way that they've gone about stopping the drive and coming back. Other times, they've brought up the defender that's on that developing strong side from the block on a closeout all the way up. And think about that now. If you're running from the block all the way out to the wing, that's a long way to recover out to a shooter. I mean, that's basically like, here's a wide open shooter that whatever action you were running got a guy open, or there's some weird long rebound and the guy's just standing there. I mean, so other than running from like the opposite corner up to the wing, that's about as far as you're going to go in a half court offense to close out on somebody, right? So to me, again, that kind of gives good daylight. And then what they were doing in this last Providence game is kind of, sometimes instead of bringing that guy up from the block, because they were helping so hard, they weren't using that guy to recover back. They would either have the guy come up from the block, which again is a pretty long closeout, or it's like a peel switch where the guy that got screened then has to run all the way out to the wing. And I guess what I'm getting at is it's a long way to run and close out. And I think because is the guy from the block, or is the guy that's peeling off getting screened going out there? And sometimes Indiana sent both of those guys. Sometimes they sent one of them. Sometimes they sent none of them. Sometimes two went to the ball. And then when they noticed two went to the ball, two guys then went down to the corner because they thought one of them was going to handle the guy that was about to shoot. And that didn't happen. And again, Indiana's just kind of putting themselves in rotation immediately when that's kind of the goal of the defense, right? Of the offense is to get teams in rotation and kind of scrambling around. And Indiana kind of willingly puts themselves in that with this defense. All that to say, I think if you have rangy, long, athletic, springy, quick twitch athletes on your team that can cover a lot of space and bounce out and do all that, I think it is possible that this defense can work better. And there were times when Indiana didn't really seem like they were communicating, but they were able to, one guy goes here, one guy goes there. Okay, you can see how it can work, right? But at other times, I think Kim Ingles did a good job of sending the guy in the corner to the opposite corner. And then again, there's long closeouts for guys to recover back, or they got to be guarding two guys with another guy back in this corner. So I guess I'll wrap this up by saying this. It has not worked at a high level in the post like TJD years, I'd say. And sometimes I like to say before TJ, or like during TJD and after TJD, because you are right. They had a great defense their first year, and I kind of have to go back and look. And the second year, they still had a decently rated defense, but I think way too often it's clear they're super confused and they're just giving up easy open looks. And I think it's just too confusing for kids at this level. And B, it is also from a time when 3-pointers weren't hunted so much. So I think it's just one of these things where they're like tying their hands behind their back to start games if they're going to have teams running ball screens with guys in those positions, because it almost like spots the other team some good looks every game.
Yeah, the thing that this keeps popping into my head as you talk about this, and you kind of mentioned like the team that the kind of players that you need to have this work. It's like it's not what Indiana is rolling out there in terms of having two bigs and then Mackenzie and Baco playing the three, who to his credit has gotten better over his career defensively, but is not someone that I would consider an above average defender by any means, and he's also not a guy who's a quick twitch, overly athletic player. So not only are they deploying a defense that is going to be difficult for most teams to execute, even if you had that type of player, they're rolling out a lineup that doesn't necessarily kind of fit the description of what you said would be helpful to work with this defense. That kind of brings me to my next question, which is the two big setup, which is something you dove into a little bit today in film session with Umar Ballo, and we saw Indiana against Sam Houston go away at times from the two big lineup, and it seemed to bear some fruit offensively. Spacing was better. One thing I've noticed a lot early in these games when they've been going with two bigs, they're trying these force feed passes from the top of the key, and more often than not only is it a tough pass, the way Indiana's throwing these passes is it's almost like when the ball's released, there's a better than 50% chance it's not going to connect. So it's like, why are they even throwing the pass? So couple that with the fact that they're playing this huge lineup and they've been getting destroyed on the defensive glass, and it kind of brings me to this question of, for this team to maximize its potential, are they going to have to go away from the two big lineup more often than not?
Well, I think their use of Umar Ballo is kind of the emerging tension of this team right now. And what I mean by that is this. I was working with someone this year giving us a little bit of lineup data. And I believe before the Sam Houston State game, on defense, Indiana is like about 20 points better per 100 possessions adjusted for defense with Umar Ballo in the lineup. They need his rim protection. They need his force down low, because these guys have been getting off a ton of straight line drives. There's all the nail slot rim nonsense that's happened here and there. They haven't really been at times super connected. They haven't had focus sometimes. Help has been issues with that as well. So he's been important for their defense, and when he's off the floor, they're worse defensively. That said, on offense, it's and this is the film session that I did for today, so I encourage you all to check it out. But you are right that because of how he's used, right? Like Umar Ballo is not a jump shooter and he's not a driver. So when he's in the lineup, really the only way, and if he's going to be starting and he's going to be in the game and he's going to be that big and that imposing, and you're going to bring him in as kind of your marquee portal guy, and you're going to pay him whatever he got, $1 million or I don't know. I don't know how much Umar Ballo is getting paid, but he's getting paid good money to play on this team. How can you kind of not start him? But I think what happens is, to your point and about how he's being used, they seal early in those possessions, right? And it's not like Renew and Ballo are down on the block the whole time and the spacing's terrible. They're still running a 4-out 1 in with those guys in. But with Ballo, yeah, and sometimes they do it with Renew too, but they try to seal early. And yeah, their hard passes up over the top of the defense. Help kind of runs to it and swarms, and it's not action that is everyone's moving, everyone's passing and cutting and screening, and the defense, who knows what's going to happen next. It's everyone stand around while they like kind of hunt in to pass that in. So that's the difference between when he's in the lineup with the starters versus when they go 5 out and they get Goody at the 4. There's more movement with those guys, and it's not standing around trying to get it in. He also tries to seal early in transition, which sometimes works, but at other times, if guys are trying to drive the lane quick off of semi-transition or transition and he's already there, all of a sudden there's spacing issues with a guy trying to drive into the paint to maybe kick out for a three or just get the look themselves, right? So that's another issue with it. Now, that said, with him in the lineup, if they're running ball screens with him, okay, at least he's kind of on the move out of the paint. I wouldn't say that he's highly skilled at those. They can work. I mean, I have some examples of, okay, like, they can get in the ball on the move, and that at least kind of frees up a little bit more movement and guys are moving a little bit more, but it's still kind of like a two-man action thing, right? And the same thing as I showed in today's film session, they've, last 2 years, Galloway has been really successful with those tight dribble handoffs that are closer to the basket. And then it's either he can throw the lob up to the big or just take it himself. And they did one of those with Rice to start the game too. And again, that's another action that it's not that they're just trying to seal with Ballo. But again, it is kind of a two-man action again, right? It's not five moving. It's not 4 or 5 guys moving, passing, screening, and cutting. And so you see more fluidity with him out of the lineup on offense. But the defense suffers, and that's kind of the tension that I'm talking about is how can they involve him with maybe a little bit more movement going so that everything's not so predictable and telegraphed, and they can use his defense in those lineups as well. And I think that'll be interesting going forward to see how that kind of progresses.
Another guy I wanted to ask you about was Miles Rice, because we saw that game in Tennessee. I went down for that game, was super impressed with just how he played against Zakai Ziegler of Tennessee. Now look at Tennessee, where they are as a team right now, one of the top 5 teams in the country. Indiana goes down there and wins that exhibition game. Miles Rice was terrific. He was also great in the South Carolina win, but we saw his play fall off noticeably down in the Bahamas. Played a lot better the other night, the second half against Sam Houston. Is there anything they could be doing differently with Miles Rice to maybe maximize his talent and his production, or is this still kind of a work in progress in terms of how he's going to be utilized the rest of the season?
It's a good question. I guess to not maybe directly answer that, but I am surprised. I was surprised, hearing him early in the in the off season. I know that there's that Player's Perspective podcast. Listen to his appearance there with Miller Kopp interviewing him and listening to him talk to the media and stuff. He seems like a really high energy, intelligent, like smart kid who's really about getting teammates involved, being a leader, being a leader, being a leader. And so it was surprising seeing him in the Bahamas, where it seemed like his body language was lacking at times. He seemed kind of down after their rough start, and it never really recovered for him. And that even bled over into the first half against Sam Houston. He had a tough kind of baseline jumper in the second half that I think kind of got him going, and he kind of sprung up from there. And playing in those 5-out lineups, he has bigger gaps to exploit, and I think that's more of his bread and butter. I'd mentioned that tighter dribble handoff he did in the first half right at the beginning of the game against Sam Houston, and he just kind of seemed uncomfortable with it. The way he went up with the shot was like a little weird. So I think him getting those bigger driving lanes is going to help him play to his strengths, and because that's what he can do, and he's got quickness, and he can all of a sudden he's and that's what he came in for, right? Like, they needed better guard play. They needed guys that could do that. And so again, that tension with Bottle in the lineup, sometimes it's just not there for him to be able to do that. And that might be a little bit of why he looks a little bit stuck in quicksand, and he's trying to go places sometimes and just turning the ball over or going too quick, or he thinks he can go somewhere and he can't. And so I think some of the decision-making at times has been tough, but it might be coupled with, again, the lineups that he's in. And I think in the absence of him vocally leading, and I think having his chest out a little bit higher as they play, honestly, some of that to me has gone to Luke Goody, right? He's a guy up on the bench that is high energy, that's calling out stuff, that's being vocal. He's doing that on the court as well. And, Goody, outside of the Sam Houston State game, the 3-point shot has struggled. let's be honest about that. But I mean, he has hit some. Don't get me wrong, but he's had some games where he hasn't missed shots, but he's still in it, right? He's still giving energy on both ends, and frankly, he's one of the guys that's getting on defense, I think, some straight line drives right against him, and he's not the best defender, but I think his attitude and energy and effort is what's leading this team. And I think as the season goes, for them to really maximize things, I think Miles Rice needs to be doing that as well, because it seems like he has the ability to do that and has spoken to it. And maybe as they continue to work through the season and find out how to work things better, he can get to that level and be that leader that I think Indiana needs out of their starting lineup.
Yeah, the last thing I wanted to ask you about is just the 3-point shooting, because obviously the percentage has gotten much better this season, but the rate at which Indiana is taking 3-pointers is not noticeably different from last season or really any of the previous seasons under Mike Woodson. And it was interesting because when we talked to Woodson after the Tennessee exhibition game, we asked him about the 3-point volume. I think they at that point were taking a little more from the perimeter than what they are now. And he had mentioned to us that they had been taking something like 27 or 28 threes in their closed scrimmages. So the fact that he mentioned that, I read that as kind of, this is what, maybe I was reading too much into it, but I read it as more of like, this is kind of the number that we aspire to take. This is kind of what we're looking to do more this season. And so the other night against Sam Houston, they take 11 threes in the first half. I think they made 5, and then they take 4 in the second half. And so right now, I think there's, I don't have Ken Palm pulled up in front of me, but I think there's somewhere like in the 340s in terms of percentage of field goals attempted from 3. So not very high. And then you look at what good he's shooting now. I think after the game the other night, he's up in the high 30s percentage wise, and Baco's shooting a really good percentage. And it's just a little bit head scratching that you would have these guys that can shoot the 3 at this high of a percentage, and they have, to their credit, run some pin downs and different actions to free them and get them some open looks. But the 3-point shooting has not changed in any meaningful way from last season, and that was a big topic of conversation. So, as two people here that write and analyze Indiana basketball, what are we to make of this situation? Is there any? I remember a couple weeks ago when Jared was on the show, I talked to him about the 3-point shooting, and I mentioned maybe it's the competition they're playing early in the season. Maybe they have the advantage inside, that they're going to pound the ball inside. Well, they went to the Bahamas, and they didn't have the advantage on all of those teams, and they still didn't take a ton of threes. I mean, what someone pointed out to me that I'm on a text thread with is like the second half against Gonzaga, they're down like 20 or 15 to 20 the whole half. They're walking the ball up the court, not looking to get 3-pointers. And so I don't even know what I'm asking for sure here, but it's more of like just a kind of a rant on the 3-point shooting. And is there any hope for this changing, or is this just kind of what it is? We've got the body of work now, 3 seasons and 8 games. We've been told that more 3-point shooting is coming, and until it happens, I think we're just to believe that it's not going to happen.
Well, I think I first want to start. You are right. I had kind of knocked Giddy's 3-point shooting, but he is shooting 39.3% right now. So
after
even
a 5 for 7 game, I mean, that helps boost it
for sure. But yeah, his percentage has increased pretty significantly, I think, just based off that one game. So the 3-point shooting, where to even begin here? I think that there has been, it's going back to what I said at the beginning of the podcast, like the Mike Woodson Indiana experience life cycle. And I think this is another one of those that we have fallen into a couple times, kind of a Lucy with the football situation, whatever you want to say with this. But, I think in his initial press conference, he said the 3-ball changed the game. I think in both of the last 2 off seasons, he said they were going to shoot more 3-pointers. I think this year people really bought it because of Luke Goody. and Baco is still on the team. And they're, with the way that Carlisle and Rice play, it just seemed like they were guys that, even though their percentage maybe wasn't great last season, out west, that they were going to be able to come in this season and at least get the shots up, right? And that hasn't happened at all. They're still their rate is one amongst the lowest in the entire country this season. And I think really the season's almost about 25% in the book. So I don't have any evidence, or I don't think that there's anything going on that's going to, here's why they're shooting less and they're going to make these tweaks or make these adjustments and they're going to be shooting at least up to average of what a Division I NCAA team is shooting in 2024, 2025. Because I think right now, right, and these numbers are, ballparky, but they're shooting 15 to 17 a game. And depending on how many possessions the team's getting, et cetera, I think that most average teams are shooting about 24 to 25 a game. Now, all that said, this can work, but there are other things within their offensive profile that have to be elite, right? Because if Indiana's going to shoot high 30s and make 7 to 9 threes a game, there are opponents that are going to be taking 25 to 30, and some nights are only making 8 or 9. Like if you look at really what the makes have been against their opponents, it's not like they're getting blown, their doors are getting blown off in terms of how many points their opponent's getting on a 3-point line versus what they're making. So if they can be highly efficient in their smaller amount of looks, okay, you can kind of see how that can work. But to kind of really maximize this offense, they got to be getting to like the line a ton. And to their credit this year, they're shooting much better from the line. I mean, they're shooting 77.7, which is 36th best in the country. Right. And their free throw rate isn't elite. It's 125th, but I would think that needs to be up much higher. Right. They need to be elite at that so that they're getting those looks at the line to kind of compensate for less threes. And then it's things like their turnovers, right? If they were a super low turnover team and weren't giving their opponent extra opportunities, I could see the argument for shooting less threes, which is right now their turnover percentage is 19.2, which is 258th best in the country. As we know, they have not been great with the ball. And their offensive rebounding percentage, is 138th best in the country, which again is just kind of at the bottom of like the top third. So some of these other things, and effective field goal, if you look at another 4 factors thing, they are 53rd in the country because they're shooting the 3 pretty well. And, their percentages down lows with guys making shot has been pretty good too. Their offense is 45th overall. But so I guess to wrap this up, I don't see them shooting more. And maybe what Woodson's philosophy just is high efficiency on a low amount of attempts and trying to be elite at some of those other categories. But because they're not, I do think that they're leaving some points on the board every game. And then because they are running the style with Ballo in the lineup that he's a non-shooting 5 and they need to dump it into him and such, it's just less possessions they have to shoot threes. Because the reason they shot 11 threes in the first half against Sam Houston State, partly because they rebounded the ball better and got out and ran, right? And they got some of those threes in transition. And that's something that a lot of other teams do that Indiana, because of their rebounding issues, have not really had in their bag, so to speak. And this is lesser competition, but against Sam Houston State with quicker guys and better rebounding, they were able to get some too. So, yeah.
Well, Ryan, I feel like we could have probably a 3-hour conversation because there's probably a lot of other things that we could talk about at this point about IU basketball. But it's been I guess the best way to put it, it's been an interesting start to the season. Sky high expectations. Indiana got, I think, ranked up as high as 14th, and then obviously fall out of the polls. I don't think the season is lost by any means. I think there was a lot of people coming with the skies falling after the Louisville performance and the Gonzaga performance, rightfully so, because in these these marquee games against top opponents, Indiana has consistently underperformed, and so much was made of the importance of going to the Bahamas and getting some quality wins in terms of building a tournament resume. Indiana didn't do that, so now they've kind of put themselves in a position where they're going to have to do a lot of work in the Big Ten. And as we have seen some of these early Big Ten scores, it's not going to be easy to go on the road and win. We just saw Ohio State get smashed yesterday by Maryland on the road, and there's just not a lot of games you can look at in the Big Ten and say we can go on that court and win for sure. So Indiana's going to have to take care of home court. They're going to have to figure out a way to win 3 or 4, maybe 5 Big Ten road games if they want to contend in the Big Ten. Hard to see that happening right now. Not saying it's impossible, but just based on the body of evidence we have so far. But again, we'll see how it all plays out. Ryan, thanks for taking the time to come on the show and help us make sense of some of these things and give us your thoughts. Do a great job with film session and the minute after on Inside the Hall.
Anytime.
Thanks, everybody, as always, for listening to Podcast on the Brink. If you enjoy the show, leave us a rating and a review over on Apple Podcasts. Leave us a 5-star rating over on Spotify, and we'll be back soon with another episode of Podcast on the Brink.